Dr. Alex Carter sat in his small office on Earth, staring at the message that had just appeared on his screen. The words glowed bright blue against the dark background, and he read them 3 times before he could believe what they said. Urgent. Assignment. Report to Transport Bay 7 in 2 hours. Bring only essential language files. Classification. Diplomatic emergency. Alex rubbed his tired eyes and looked around his cluttered workspace. Books about alien languages covered every surface. His computer screen showed dozens of translation programs running at once. He had been working on the Vegan trade disputes for 6 months, trying to understand why their words for peace and profit used the same sound. The door to his office opened without a knock. Commander Helen Brooks walked in, her face serious and worried. She wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight knot. "Carter, you got the message," she said, not asking but stating a fact. "Yes, ma'am, but I don't understand. What kind of emergency needs a linguist?" Alex stood up and straightened his wrinkled shirt. He was not a military man, just a scientist, who happened to be very good with languages. Brooks moved to his window and looked out at the city below. Flying cars moved between the tall buildings like silver fish swimming through glass towers. "There's a situation at Harmony Point Station. 3 alien species are meeting there, and they can't talk to each other. Every translator we've sent has failed." "What species?" Alex asked, already reaching for his language database. "The Korthak Empire, the Zephyrian Collective, and the Vale Consortium." Brooks turned back to face him. "They've been fighting each other for decades. This meeting is supposed to bring peace to the Outer Rim territories." Alex nodded slowly. He knew about these species from his studies, but he had never worked with their languages directly. The Korthak were warriors who spoke in complex battle songs. The Zephyrians used mathematics and quantum theory in their daily speech. The Vale Consortium was the strangest of all. They seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, and their words could change reality around them. "Why me?" Alex asked. "There are linguists with more field experience." Brooks smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Because you're the only one who has studied all 3 languages, and because you're the only one available who isn't afraid of them." Alex felt his stomach tighten. "Should I be afraid?" "Pack light," Brooks said instead of answering. "The transport leaves in 90 minutes. 2 hours later, Alex found himself strapped into a seat aboard the military transport ship Aurora. The other passengers were all soldiers or diplomats, people who looked comfortable with weapons and dangerous situations. Alex clutched his small bag of personal items and tried not to think about what waited for him at Harmony Point. The journey through hyperspace took 18 hours. Alex spent most of the time reviewing language files on his portable computer. He studied the singing patterns of Korthak battle speech, trying to understand how their emotions changed the meaning of their words. He practiced the mental exercises needed to interpret Zephyrian quantum language, where single sentences could have dozens of different meanings depending on mathematical probability. The Vale Consortium language was the hardest. Their words existed in several dimensions at once. To understand them, a translator had to think in ways that hurt the human brain. Alex had only read about it in textbooks. He had never tried to actually speak it. When the Aurora dropped out of hyperspace, Alex got his first look at Harmony Point Station through the small window next to his seat. The station was huge, shaped like a metal flower with 8 arms reaching out into space. But it looked more like a fortress than a place for peaceful meetings. Weapon platforms surrounded it, and military ships from a dozen different worlds floated nearby like watchful guards. "Impressive, isn't it?" said the woman, sitting across from him. She wore a captain's uniform and had short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. "I'm Captain Lisa Morgan. I'll be running security for your little translation party." "Little?" Alex looked out at the massive station again. "This looks like preparation for a war, not a peace meeting." Captain Morgan's expression grew serious. "Maybe that's because nobody really expects peace to work. These 3 species have been fighting for so long, most people think it's just their nature." The Aurora docked with a soft bump that Alex barely felt. As they walked through the station's corridors, Alex noticed how empty everything seemed. Their footsteps echoed off metal walls, and the few people they passed spoke in whispers. "Captain," Morgan led him to a briefing room where a tall, thin man in diplomatic robes waited for them. He had nervous eyes and kept checking a tablet computer every few seconds. "Dr. Carter," the man said, standing up quickly. "I'm Ambassador Paul Newman. Thank you for coming so quickly. We have a very serious situation here." Alex sat down at the metal table. "Commander Brooks told me this was about translation problems." Ambassador Newman glanced at Captain Morgan, then back at Alex. "Yes, well, it's more complicated than that. The 3 delegations arrived yesterday and we've already had 2 incidents. The Korthak delegation started a fight with station security because they thought our greeting was an insult. The Zephyrians won't leave their quarters because they calculated that the probability of successful communication is less than 12%, and the Veil Consortium representatives keep disappearing." "Disappearing?" Alex asked. "Not literally," Captain Morgan explained. "They shift partially into other dimensions when they get upset. Makes it hard to have a conversation with someone when half of them isn't really there." Alex opened his computer and began pulling up language files. "What exactly do they want to discuss? If I know the topic, I can prepare better translations." Ambassador Newman and Captain Morgan looked at each other again. Something passed between them that Alex couldn't read. "Territorial disputes in the Outer Rim," Newman said finally. "Trade routes, mining rights, that sort of thing." Alex nodded and began organizing his translation programs. But something felt wrong. The way the 2 officials had looked at each other, the heavy security around the station, the fact that Earth's best linguists had all failed, none of it made sense for a simple trade dispute. He spent the next few hours setting up his equipment in a conference room near the center of the station. The room had 3 separate sections, each designed for one of the alien species. The Korthak area had high ceilings and red lighting that would make their natural coloring look more impressive. The Zephyrian section was filled with holographic displays for their mathematical visualizations. The Veil Consortium space had special field generators that would help keep them stable in this dimension. As evening came, Alex made his final preparations. He loaded all 3 language programs into his neural interface headset and ran system checks on the translation computers. Everything looked ready, but when he tried to access the files about what topics would be discussed tomorrow, he found that they were classified above his security level. He could prepare to translate any conversation, but he couldn't know what the conversation would be about. Alex sat alone in the empty conference room and looked at the 3 alien sections around him. Tomorrow, he would try to help 3 species who had been enemies for decades find a way to talk to each other. He would be the bridge between minds that thought in completely different ways. He just wished he knew what they really wanted to talk about. Outside his window, the stars looked cold and distant. Somewhere among them, fleets of warships waited to see if peace was possible. And here on Harmony Point Station, one human translator would soon discover that some conversations change everything. Alex woke up early the next morning and checked his equipment one more time. The translation computers hummed quietly in the conference room, ready to turn alien thoughts into human words. He had spent most of the night dreaming about strange songs and mathematical equations that changed color when he looked at them. At exactly 9 o'clock, the first delegation arrived. 3 Korthak warriors entered the room, their gray skin covered in ritual scars and their eyes glowing like red coals. They wore armor that looked like it was made from black metal, and each one carried weapons that Alex tried not to look at too closely. The leader stepped forward and began to speak. His voice was deep and musical, like a song made of growls and whispers. Alex put on his neural headset and activated the translation program. The words that came through the computer made Alex's blood run cold. "We sing the song of the small furless ones, who break the great wheel of war," the Korthak leader chanted. "We sing of the ones who make the eternal dance stop turning. We sing of those who should not be." Alex checked his translation program twice, thinking he had made an error. But the words were clear. The Korthak was not talking about trade routes or mining rights. He was talking about humans. Before Alex could ask any questions, the Zephyrian delegation entered. They looked like tall, thin humans, but their skin was silver and their eyes were completely black. They moved in perfect formation, like dancers following music that only they could hear. The Zephyrian leader connected a cable from her head to one of the quantum computers in their section. Immediately, numbers and equations began flowing across the holographic displays. Alex's translation program worked frantically to turn the mathematical concepts into words. Biological impossibility parameters detected, the computer announced in its flat electronic voice. Species designation, human. Combat effectiveness beyond statistical models. Adaptation rate exceeds known limits. Threat assessment, incalculable. Alex stared at the flowing numbers. The Zephyrians were not here to discuss territory. They were here to discuss humanity, and they were afraid. The third delegation materialized, slowly in their section of the room. The Veil Consortium representatives looked like shadows that had learned to walk upright. They flickered in and out of focus, sometimes appearing solid and sometimes looking like smoke. When they spoke, their voices seemed to come from far away. Alex activated the dimensional translation field and listened to their words form in the air around him. The species that should not be walks between the spaces we know, they whispered. They change the shape of what is real. They make new paths where no paths should exist. The pattern of all things bends around them. Alex sat back in his chair, his hands shaking slightly. All three species were talking about the same thing. They were talking about humans, and they were all afraid. The conference room door opened, and Captain Morgan entered, followed by Ambassador Newman. Both of them looked nervous. "How are the translations going?" Newman asked, but his voice sounded forced and cheerful. "They're not talking about trade disputes," Alex said quietly. "They're talking about us, about humans." Captain Morgan and Ambassador Newman exchanged the same worried look Alex had seen the day before. "I think we need to talk," Captain Morgan said. She led Alex to a small office down the hall from the conference room. Ambassador Newman followed, closing the door behind them and activating a privacy field that made the walls hum with electronic static. "What's really going on here?" Alex demanded. "Why are three alien species holding a meeting about humanity?" Captain Morgan poured herself a cup of coffee from a machine in the corner. Her hands were steady, but Alex could see tension in her shoulders. "Because we're on trial," she said simply. "What do you mean, on trial?" Ambassador Newman sat down heavily in a chair that creaked under his weight. "The three species you met today have been fighting each other for over 1,000 years. It's not just politics or territory, it's their way of life. They fight for exactly 47 years. Then they have a peace period for 3 years. Then they fight again. It's been the same pattern for centuries." "So?" Alex asked, though he was beginning to understand. "So humans arrived in this part of the galaxy 30 years ago," Captain Morgan continued. "Within a single generation, we disrupted their entire system. Human diplomats found new solutions to their old conflicts. Human traders created economic partnerships that made war less profitable. Human military advisors taught their armies tactics that made their ritual battles meaningless." Alex felt a cold understanding settle in his stomach. "We broke their pattern." "We broke everything," Newman said. "The Korthak Empire had its first civilian government in 800 years because a human negotiator convinced them to try democracy. The Zephyrian collective's mathematical models of society stopped working because humans are too unpredictable. The Veil Consortium can't maintain their dimensional stability because human influence is changing the basic rules of reality in this region. And now they want to do something about it," Captain Morgan added. Alex looked back toward the conference room where the three delegations waited. "What kind of something?" "That's what we're here to find out," Newman said. "But the rumors we've heard are not good. Some people think they want to quarantine humanity. Others think they want to relocate us to a different part of the galaxy. And the worst rumors?" Alex asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Captain Morgan and Newman looked at each other again. "Complete erasure," Captain Morgan said quietly. "Not just killing humans, but removing all evidence that we ever existed, and doing the same to any species that has been infected by human thinking. Alex felt the room spin around him. Infected? That's how they see it, Newman explained. They think human unpredictability spreads to other species. Young aliens throughout the galaxy have started questioning their ancient traditions. They want to try new things, find creative solutions to problems, work together instead of fighting. The established powers see this as a disease that humans carry. So this isn't a peace conference, Alex said slowly. It's a trial, and I'm not here as a translator. You're here as humanity's defense attorney, Captain Morgan said. Except you don't know galactic law, you don't understand their legal system, and you're defending your entire species against charges you've never heard before. Alex stood up and walked to the small window in the office. Outside, he could see the alien ships floating in space around the station. Each one was armed with weapons that could destroy planets. What happens if I lose? He asked. Then every human in the galaxy dies, Newman said. Along with every alien who has been influenced by human thinking. The three species have already identified 17 different worlds where the infection has spread. Alex turned back to face them. And what happens if I win? We don't know, Captain Morgan admitted. This has never happened before. Three species who have been enemies for 1,000 years have never agreed on anything. The fact that they're working together now shows how serious they think the threat is. What threat? Alex demanded. What have humans actually done that's so terrible? We've given them hope, Newman said quietly. For the first time in centuries, young people in their societies believe that things can change. They believe that the future can be different from the past. They believe that they don't have to repeat the same patterns forever. And that's a crime? To species that have built their entire civilizations on eternal, unchanging patterns? Captain Morgan nodded. Yes, that's the worst crime imaginable. Alex walked back to his chair and sat down. The weight of what they were telling him pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. How long do I have? He asked. The formal trial begins tomorrow, Newman said. But the real question is, do you think you can do it? Can you defend humanity against charges that we've never faced before, using laws we don't understand, in front of judges who see change itself as evil? Alex thought about all the humans scattered across the galaxy. Traders and diplomats, teachers and engineers, families who had built new lives on distant worlds. He thought about the young aliens who had learned to dream of better futures. He thought about the 17 worlds that would be destroyed if he failed. I don't have a choice, he said finally. Someone has to try. Captain Morgan smiled for the first time since Alex had met her. That's the most human thing you could have said. What do you mean? Any other species would spend time calculating the odds of success, she explained. They would make logical decisions based on probability and risk assessment. But humans? We just try anyway, even when the odds are impossible. And that's exactly what scares them, Newman added. Alex stood up and straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow, the trial would begin. Tomorrow, he would try to defend humanity against the charge of being human. He just hoped that being human would be enough. The next morning, Alex walked into the conference room to find it completely transformed. The three separate sections had been rearranged into a courtroom layout. The alien delegation sat in a curved formation facing a single chair in the center. That chair was obviously meant for him. Captain Morgan and Ambassador Newman sat in a small section marked for observers. They both looked worried, and Alex could see why. The room felt heavy with the weight of judgment, and the aliens stared at him with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. War Chief Thrax of the Korthak Empire stood up first. He was the largest of the three Korthak warriors, with scars, covering his gray arms and a voice that could shake the walls. When he began to speak, his words came out as a battle song that made Alex's translation equipment work overtime. I sing the charges against the small furless ones, Thrax chanted, his red eyes fixed on Alex. I sing of crimes against the great wheel of war that has turned for 1,000 seasons. I sing of the breaking of sacred patterns. Alex's headset translated the formal charges, and each one hit him like a physical blow. The Korthak accused humanity of disrupting the natural order of conflict, corrupting the purity of battle ritual and spreading the poison of peace to warriors who were born to fight. "Tell us, translator of the criminal species," Thrax continued, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Do you know of the human called Jake Collins?" Alex's heart sank. He knew that name. Jake Collins was a trade negotiator who had become famous throughout the galaxy for his unconventional methods. "Yes, I know of him." "Then you know of the Meridian incident," Thrax said. The other Korthak warriors began a low, rumbling chant that sounded like distant thunder. Alex nodded reluctantly. The Meridian incident had been talked about in diplomatic circles for years. 2 Korthak fleets had been locked in ritual combat over control of the Meridian asteroid belt. The battle was supposed to last exactly 47 days, with the survivors claiming victory according to ancient tradition. Jake Collins had arrived on day 32 as a trade representative. Instead of waiting for the battle to end, he had done something unprecedented. He challenged both fleet commanders to a drinking contest. "Your Jake Collins made mockery of sacred combat," Thrax growled. "He offered alcohol poison to warriors in the middle of holy battle. He made them compete in the ways of civilians instead of the ways of war." The translation program struggled with the complex emotions in Thrax's voice. Alex could hear shame, anger, and something else, something that might have been confusion. "The fleet commanders accepted his challenge," Alex said quietly. "Yes," Thrax's voice rose to a roar. "They abandoned their ships. They abandoned their duty. They sat at a table like common traders and drank strange liquids until they could not stand. And when the alcohol contest was finished, they signed papers that ended the battle 15 days early." The other Korthak warriors made sounds of disapproval that filled the room like the growling of angry animals. "The result was the first civilian government in Korthak history," Thrax continued. "Warriors who had never known anything but combat were suddenly making decisions about farming and building roads. The sacred ways of our ancestors were forgotten. Children grew up without learning the battle songs. The great wheel of war stopped turning." Alex tried to think of how to respond, but Thrax was not finished. And this corruption spread. Other Korthak fleets began to question the old ways. Some even refused to fight when the ritual time came. They said they wanted to try Jake Collins' solutions to their problems. The infection of human thinking had taken root in our warrior hearts. The war chief sat down, and immediately the leader of the Zephyrian delegation stood up. She was tall and thin, with silver skin that reflected the room's lights like a mirror. When she spoke, numbers and equations appeared in the air around her. "I am Prime Calculator Zara 7, she said, her voice perfectly flat and emotionless. "I present mathematical proof of human criminal behavior." The holographic displays around the Zephyrian section filled with complex charts and graphs. Alex's translation program worked to turn the mathematical concepts into words he could understand. "For 1,043 years, galactic civilization has operated according to predictable mathematical models," Zara 7 continued. "War, peace, trade, population growth, technological development, all followed precise equations that allowed us to calculate the future with 97.3% accuracy." The displays showed flowing charts that looked like rivers of light, all moving in smooth, predictable patterns. "Then humans arrived in our sector of space," Zara 7 said. "Observe the mathematical chaos that followed." The smooth patterns on the display suddenly became jagged and broken. Lines that had been straight for centuries now curved in impossible directions. Numbers that should have been stable fluctuated wildly. "Human behavior does not follow logical patterns," Zara 7 explained. "They make decisions based on emotions, intuition, and concepts they call gut feelings. They ignore statistical probability. They attempt solutions that mathematical analysis proves will fail. And somehow, these impossible solutions often succeed." Alex watched the chaotic patterns on the displays and felt a strange sense of pride. Humans really were unpredictable. "The economic disruption alone has been catastrophic," Zara 7 continued. "Human traders ignore our carefully calculated exchange rates. They create new types of contracts that our computers cannot analyze. They form partnerships with species that our models said were incompatible. The result is economic chaos that spreads throughout the galaxy. The displays showed trade routes that looked like tangled webs instead of orderly lines. But the worst crime is the infection of other species with human irrationality, Zara 7 said. Young Zephyrians have begun making creative mathematical discoveries that violate our fundamental principles. They solve problems using methods that should not work. They ask questions that have no logical answers. Our perfect society is becoming as chaotic as human society. The prime calculator sat down, and the leader of the Veil Consortium delegation began to materialize more solidly in the center of their section. The being looked like a shadow wearing clothes, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from several directions at once. "I am speaker for the spaces between," it said. "I present evidence of reality crimes." The dimensional translation field around Alex began to hum more loudly as it worked to interpret concepts that existed in multiple dimensions. "Humans exist too solidly in single-dimensional space," the speaker continued. "They think in straight lines. They believe in absolute concepts like right and wrong, true and false. This rigid thinking creates dimensional stress throughout local reality." Alex tried to understand what that meant, but the concepts were too alien for his human mind to fully grasp. "Where humans go, the flexible nature of reality becomes brittle," the speaker explained. "Other species begin to think in human ways. They start to believe that things can only be one way instead of many ways. They lose the ability to exist in the spaces between definite states." The translation field began to show visual representations of what the speaker was describing. Reality around human settlements looked like solid blocks, while areas without human influence appeared fluid and flexible. "Young members of our consortium have begun to choose single-dimensional existence," the speaker said, and for the first time Alex heard emotion in its voice. It sounded like sadness. "They say they want to experience human-style certainty. They abandon the beautiful uncertainty of multi-dimensional existence to live in the harsh clarity of single reality." The speaker's form became more solid, and Alex realized it was demonstrating what it meant. For a moment, the being looked almost human. "This infection threatens the fundamental nature of our species," the speaker continued. "If it spreads, the Veil Consortium will cease to exist. We will become trapped in single-dimensional space like humans. The spaces between realities will become empty and cold." The three prosecutors sat down, and the room fell silent. Alex looked around at the alien faces staring at him, and he understood the full weight of what he was facing. These species were not just afraid of human military power or technology. They were afraid of the human way of thinking itself. They had built their civilizations on certainty, the certainty of eternal war, the certainty of mathematical prediction, the certainty of fluid reality. Humans represented the end of all certainty, the beginning of change and growth and evolution. And evolution, Alex realized, was exactly what they feared most. The war chief Thrax stood up again and pointed one clawed finger at Alex. "These are the charges against humanity," he said. "How do you answer, translator of the criminal species?" Alex stood up slowly, his mind racing. He had no legal training, no knowledge of galactic law, and no idea how to defend his entire species against charges that he was only beginning to understand. But he was human, which meant he would try anyway. "I answer that change is not a crime," he said simply, "and I answer that you are all afraid of the wrong thing." Alex stood in the center of the courtroom, feeling the weight of three civilizations staring at him. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady as he began to speak. "You say that humans are criminals because we bring change," he said, looking directly at War Chief Thrax. "But I want to ask you something, War Chief. When was the last time your people grew stronger through their endless wars?" Thrax's red eyes narrowed dangerously. "We have been strong for 1,000 years, translator. Our strength does not change." "Exactly," Alex said. "It doesn't change, it doesn't grow. You've been fighting the same battles in the same ways for centuries. Your warriors are not becoming better fighters. They're becoming more predictable." Alex activated his translation computer and began to display historical data about Korthak military encounters. The information flowed across the holographic screens in the room. "Look at your own records," Alex continued. Every battle follows the same pattern. Ship formation, Alpha 7 attacks formation Beta 3. The defenders respond with tactic Delta 9. The battle lasts exactly 47 days. The side with more ships wins. Where is the growth? Where is the innovation? Where is the strength that comes from learning something new? Thrax stood up angrily, but Alex pressed on before the war chief could speak. Jake Collins didn't destroy your warrior culture. He showed you that there were other ways to test strength. A drinking contest requires courage, endurance, and the ability to make decisions while your mind is clouded. These are warrior skills. But more importantly, it required your commanders to think in a new way. Alex turned to face the Zephyrian delegation. And you, Prime Calculator Zara 7. You say that human unpredictability has destroyed your mathematical models. But I have a question for you too. What good is a mathematical model that can only predict things that never change? Zara 7's silver face remained expressionless, but the equations floating around her began to shift and change. Your perfect calculations worked for 1,000 years because nothing new ever happened, Alex continued. You could predict the future because the future was exactly the same as the past. But what happens when something genuinely new enters? The galaxy? What happens when you encounter a problem that has never existed before? Alex pulled up displays showing various crises that had occurred throughout galactic history. Natural disasters, technological failures, first contacts with unknown species. Every time something unexpected happened, your mathematical models failed, Alex said. Your society froze, unable to adapt, until the crisis passed and everything returned to the old patterns. You call human chaos a problem, but chaos is just another word for life. Life grows, life changes, life finds new solutions. He gestured toward the chaotic patterns that Zara 7 had shown earlier. Look at those equations again. Yes, they're unpredictable, but look closer. They're not random. They're creative. Humans aren't destroying your mathematical models. We're showing you that reality is bigger than your models can calculate. Alex turned to face the Veil Consortium delegation. And speaker for the spaces between, you say that human thinking makes reality too rigid. But I think you're afraid of something else entirely. The shadowy being flickered slightly, its form becoming less solid. You exist in multiple dimensions because you're afraid to choose, Alex said gently. You stay in the spaces between decisions because making a definite choice feels too final. But your young people who choose single-dimensional existence aren't losing something. They're gaining the ability to fully experience life. Alex paused and looked around the room at all three delegations. All of you are afraid of the same thing, he said. You're afraid of growth, you're afraid of change. You're afraid of the possibility that tomorrow might be different from today. And you should be afraid because that's exactly what's going to happen. The room erupted in angry sounds from all three species. War Chief Thrax began a battle chant. Prime Calculator Zara 7's equations turned red with alarm patterns, and the Veil Consortium speaker started flickering between dimensions rapidly. But you're afraid of the wrong thing, Alex continued, raising his voice over the noise. You think change means destruction. You think growth means losing what you are. You're wrong. Alex activated a new set of displays, showing historical data from all three civilizations. But this time the data went back further than anyone had looked before. Look at your own histories, Alex said. Really look at them. Go back before the 1,000-year cycle of ritual wars. Go back before the mathematical models became rigid. Go back before the Veil Consortium retreated into dimensional uncertainty. The displays showed ancient records from all three species. The images were beautiful and strange. Korthak cities built for both warriors and artists. Zephyrian discoveries that combined mathematics with poetry. Veil Consortium beings who danced between dimensions while also building magnificent structures in solid reality. You were all different once, Alex said quietly. The Korthak Empire didn't just fight wars. You created the most beautiful architecture in the galaxy. Your warriors were also philosophers and artists. Your strength came not from endless repetition but from constantly finding new ways to be strong. Thrax stared at the ancient images, his scarred face showing confusion. The Zephyrian collective didn't just calculate the future. You invented it. Your mathematics didn't just predict what would happen, it created new possibilities. Your greatest discoveries came from asking questions that had no logical answers and finding ways to answer them anyway. Zara 7's equations began to slow down, forming patterns that looked almost like music. And the Veil Consortium didn't hide in the spaces between realities. You connected them. You built bridges between different dimensions. You helped other species understand truths that existed in multiple states at once. The speaker for the spaces between became completely solid for a moment, looking almost surprised by its own definite existence. You were all creative once, Alex continued. You all grew and changed and discovered new things. Then something happened. You became afraid. You decided that safety was more important than growth. You chose predictability over possibility. Alex looked directly at each delegation in turn. The 1,000-year cycle of wars wasn't tradition. It was stagnation. The rigid mathematical models weren't perfection. They were fear of the unknown. The retreat into dimensional uncertainty wasn't wisdom. It was an inability to make choices. The room had become very quiet. Even the electronic hum of the translation equipment seemed muted. Humans didn't bring destruction to your civilizations, Alex said. We brought back what you used to be. We reminded you of what you were capable of before you became afraid to change. Alex activated one final display, showing recent communications from young members of all three species. The messages had been collected from across the galaxy, transmitted in secret by those who were too young to remember the fear that had frozen their civilizations. Listen to your own children, Alex said. A young Korthak voice came through the speakers, speaking in the soft civilian dialect that had been forbidden for centuries. I want to learn how to build things, not just how to break them. I want to create songs about hope, not just about war. I want to find new ways to be strong. A young Zephyrian's voice followed, her mathematical language filled with wonder instead of rigid calculation. I solved an equation today that shouldn't have worked, but it did. I asked a question that had no logical answer, and the answer was beautiful. I want to discover things that have never been discovered before. Finally, a young member of the Veil Consortium spoke, their voice coming from only one dimension at a time. I chose to exist in solid reality today, and I saw a sunset. I felt rain on my skin. I made a friend who could touch me and know that I was really there. Choice isn't a prison. It's freedom. Alex looked around the room at the adult delegates, all of whom were staring at the speakers with expressions of shock, confusion, and something that might have been longing. Your young people aren't infected with human thinking, Alex said softly. They're infected with their own potential. They're infected with the possibility of growth. They're infected with hope. Alex walked back to his chair but remained standing. You can vote to eliminate humanity from the galaxy, he said. You can try to return to your old patterns of fear and stagnation, but you can't eliminate what we've already given you. You can't make your young people forget that change is possible. You can't make them afraid to grow. The room was completely silent now. The question isn't whether humanity is guilty of bringing change, Alex concluded. The question is whether you want to grow with us or die alone in your fear. Alex sat down and waited to see which choice they would make. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what felt like hours. Alex could hear his own heartbeat and the quiet hum of the translation equipment. The three alien delegations stared at him, then at each other, then at the recordings of their own young people that still glowed on the display screens. War Chief Thrax was the first to move. He stood up slowly, his red eyes fixed on Alex, but his expression was different now. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Confusion, perhaps, or doubt. Translator of humans, Thrax said, his voice quieter than before. Your words are clever, but words do not change the nature of reality. The wheel of war has turned for 1,000 years. It cannot simply stop because young voices sing new songs. Prime Calculator, Zara 7 stood up next, her silver face reflecting the lights from the holographic displays around her. The mathematical principles that govern our society cannot be altered by emotional arguments. Order must be maintained. Predictability must be preserved. Change leads to chaos. The speaker for the spaces between flickered into a more solid form. The boundaries between realities exist for important reasons. To choose single-dimensional existence is to limit infinite possibility. This cannot be allowed to continue. Alex felt his heart sink. Despite everything he had said, despite the evidence of their own histories, the three leaders seemed determined to vote against humanity. But then something unexpected happened. "I invoke the right of proving," called a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a young Korthak female standing in the observer section. She wore civilian clothes instead of warrior armor, and her gray skin was unmarked by ritual scars. Captain Morgan and Ambassador Newman looked surprised to see her there. War Chief Thrax's eyes widened in shock. "Kira 3, what are you doing here? How did you get aboard this station?" "I came to speak for my generation, Father," the young Korthak said, walking toward the center of the room. "And I invoke the ancient right of proving. If the translator's words are true, let them be proven in combat. If they are false, let traditional champions defend the old ways." Alex's translation equipment worked frantically to explain what was happening. The right of proving was an ancient law that allowed any disputed matter to be settled through ritualized combat. It was so old that all three species recognized it, even though it hadn't been used for centuries. "You cannot invoke that right," Thrax growled. "You are not a warrior." "I am Korthak," Kira 3 replied firmly. "The right belongs to all our people, not just those who choose the warrior path." Before Thrax could respond, two more voices spoke up. "I also invoke the right of proving," said a young Zephyrian male who had somehow entered the room without anyone noticing. His silver skin was decorated with mathematical symbols that shifted and changed like living equations. "And I as well," said a young member of the Veil Consortium who was choosing to exist entirely in solid reality. Their form was completely stable, without any dimensional flickering. Prime Calculator Zara 7 stared at the young Zephyrian. "Kai Prime, you were supposed to be in mathematical meditation for another 6 months. How are you here?" "I calculated the probability of being needed at this exact moment," Kai Prime said with a slight smile. "It was only 12%, but I decided to take the chance anyway." The young Veil Consortium being, who introduced themselves as Echo of Certainty, spoke directly to the speaker for the spaces between. "I chose to come here in single-dimensional form because this moment matters. Some choices are worth making completely." Alex watched in amazement as the three young aliens stood together in the center of the room. They looked determined, but also afraid. They were volunteering to fight for the right to change, to grow, to become something new. "The right of proving requires champions for both sides," Thrax said, his voice heavy with tradition. "If the young ones wish to prove that change is good, then we must choose champions to prove that tradition is stronger." "I will champion the old ways," Thrax declared, stepping forward and drawing his ceremonial battle sword. "As will I," said Zara 7, her mathematical displays shifting into combat calculation mode. "And I," said the speaker for the spaces between, their form becoming more solid and menacing. Alex realized with growing horror what was about to happen. The three young aliens were going to fight their own elders in ritual combat. If they lost, it would prove that the old ways were stronger. If they won, it would prove that change was possible. "Wait," Alex said, standing up. "This isn't what I wanted. I don't want anyone to get hurt." "The right of proving has been invoked," Captain Morgan said quietly. "It's an ancient law. Even the station authorities can't interfere now." The courtroom began to reshape itself again. The walls moved back to create a larger space, and the floor became a circular arena, with the spectators arranged around the edges. Combat equipment materialized from hidden storage areas. Alex found himself sitting next to Ambassador Newman, watching as 6 beings prepared to fight for the future of galactic civilization. "This is not to the death," Thrax announced, his voice carrying the formal tones of ancient ritual. "This is combat to philosophical dominance. The losers must accept the worldview of the winners completely." The 3 pairs of fighters faced each other across the arena. Alex could see the family resemblance between Thrax and Kira 3. The shared mathematical precision between Zara 7 and Chi Prime, the dimensional similarity between the two Veil Consortium beings. Begin, Thrax called out. The battle that followed was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It was not just physical combat, but a clash of entire ways of thinking. Thrax attacked with traditional Korthak warrior techniques that had been perfected over centuries. Each move was precise, powerful, and predictable. But Kira 3 responded with something completely new. She used defensive strategies that had been forbidden in warrior culture, techniques developed by civilian guards and peacekeepers. She moved in ways that confused and frustrated her father. Zara 7 projected mathematical combat algorithms that should have overwhelmed any opponent. Her equations predicted every possible move and countermove, but Chi Prime responded with creative mathematics that violated logical principles. He solved combat problems using methods that shouldn't work but somehow did. The speaker for the spaces between attacked from multiple dimensions at once, using the traditional advantage of existing in several realities simultaneously. But Echo of Certainty fought with the focused power of single-dimensional existence, bringing all their energy to bear in one reality instead of spreading it across many. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Alex watched in fascination and terror as the three young fighters demonstrated something incredible. They weren't just using new techniques, they were proving that new ways of thinking could be just as strong as old ones. Slowly, impossibly, the young fighters began to win. Kira 3's defensive strategies frustrated Thrax until he made mistakes he had never made before. Chi Prime's creative mathematics found solutions that Zara 7's rigid calculations couldn't counter. Echo of Certainty's focused existence proved more powerful than multidimensional confusion. The end came suddenly. All three traditional champions found themselves disarmed and defeated, lying on the arena floor while their young opponents stood over them. But instead of anger or shame, something unexpected happened. Thrax looked up at his daughter and began to laugh. It was a sound Alex had never heard from a Korthak before, not a battle cry or a war chant, but genuine joy. "You fight like no warrior I have ever seen," Thrax said, pride filling his voice. "You fight like someone who has learned new ways to be strong." Zara 7 stared at the mathematical displays showing Chi Prime's impossible solutions. "Your equations are beautiful," she whispered. "They should not work, but they are beautiful." The speaker for the spaces between looked at Echo of Certainty with something that might have been wonder. "You chose to be completely present in this moment. There is power in that choice." Alex rushed into the arena to help the wounded fighters. All six were bleeding. Purple blood from the Korthak, silver from the Zephyrians, and gold from the Veil Consortium beings. As he knelt beside them, their blood mixed together on the arena floor, creating new colors that had never existed before. And then from the spectator areas came a sound that filled the entire station. Cheers. Not from humans, but from the alien crews and delegates who had been watching. Young and old voices from dozens of species, all celebrating what they had just witnessed. "Why are they cheering?" Alex asked Captain Morgan, who had come down to help with the wounded. "Because they just saw proof that change is possible," she replied. "They saw tradition and innovation working together instead of destroying each other." Thrax struggled to sit up, his gray face split by an enormous grin. "The wheel of war can stop turning," he said. "But that doesn't mean we stop being warriors. It means we find new battles to fight." Zara 7 looked at her mathematical displays, which were now showing equations she had never seen before. "Perhaps perfect prediction is not as valuable as perfect surprise," she admitted. The speaker for the spaces between became completely solid and stayed that way. "I choose to be here, in this moment, in this reality, with all of you.